Hi, Learn 11 students. Welcome to the second lecture of the memory lesson. This is a second video of two videos, so only two videos this week. And this week, in this video, we are going to go over the different types of long-term memory. We will discuss the different ways that memory is tested and accessed. And then I want to give you some really great tips from an educator who also has done research and has studied the brain and learning. So we will get started. Let's see here. Just to review, we did talk about the three stages of memory in the previous video. So if you haven't watched it, please do. That's important. And we talked about consolidation and why sleep is really important to a strong memory. And I went over an activity that I have done in class to explain or show how memory, how all of these lessons show themselves during this activity, so that we could see it in action. There is a video that goes along with this lecture, this part of the lecture, and it's posted on Canvas for you. It's about 15 minutes long or so, and a lot of what I'm saying in there is just sort of describing the entire, there's a little bit of discussion after the activity about what it's showing. So I would highly suggest that you do that activity to see how some of this plays out, and that you follow along with that. Okay, now before we begin, I'm going to ask you to pull up the video in Canvas called How We Make Memories. You should see it there, and it looks just like this with the picture that's on the slide. So you can pause this video and scoot over there and watch that, and then come back when you're finished. Okay, you should have watched How We Make Memories, the brief video. The narrator talks, or presenter speaks really, really fast, so I'm not sure if you got any notes off that, but please watch it again and try and take notes after this lecture. It may make more sense after we go through some of these terms. So, one of the things that the presenter or that the video talks about are the three ways that memory is tested. So when you're in school, there are three different ways that instructors or teachers can assess whether or not you are retaining important material. And one of those ways is recognition, which asks you to identify information but will give you options. So it'll give you, it'll prompt you, say, like multiple choice from these from these options, which one is correct. And so it's not like recall, where you have to pull up information out of your brain on your own, like fill in the blank. You would have to have that stored pretty well in order to bring it out. Whereas recognition is going to allow you to recognize what you've learned or what you know. And then there's relearning. And relearning is, it's really about using information and applying it in a different way. So, for instance, writing a short answer might be relearning, because you're pulling up terminology or you're pulling up ideas that you've already learned and that are stored in your brain, but you're explaining it or you're using that information in a different way. So a video also goes into the different types of long-term memory. He speaks about procedural memory, which is when, it's like remembering how the process of something, how something is done. And procedural memory, an example of that would be like working on, using a computer. At first, you may learn how to use it, and then eventually it becomes like you can talk and use the computer at the same time. Another example of procedural memory might be riding a bike, or writing, using a pen in your hand. Like, these are things that we may have to concentrate on for a second, but really that's to learn it and store it. And then once it's stored, we're able to access how to do something without much effort. Okay, and then episodic memory is memories from the past, things that have influenced our personalities or influenced the story of our lives. For instance, like your first day of college, your perspective of the first day of school shapes so much of the story of that day. It's not necessarily factual, whereas procedural memory is really based on steps and facts and information. Episodic memory is based off of your perception of the facts, or it's shaped. The facts are shaped by and influenced by you. And then he discusses explicit memory and implicit memory. And explicit memory is memory that it takes effort. It's like explicit memory is based on facts and concepts, knowledge outside of ourselves that we have to, with effort, memorize or learn. And the example that's used in the video is studying the name of the capital of Greece. Okay, and so you can always remember that X, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the word. Oh my gosh, prefix. Thank you, man. The prefix is X. This means out or outside. So you can think of this kind of memory when we have to memorize something, we're memorizing something outside of ourselves and it takes effort. Whereas implicit memory is information that we know without a conscious effort. It's stored inside of our bodies, inside of our minds. And the example that is used in the video is, knowing that we don't like to go to the dentist or having anxiety about it is not something that we have to try to make happen or remember. I have to go back into my memory and remember what my last appointment was like in order to give me anxiety. Oftentimes it just happens on its own because the body knows and the memories are stored. So im, the prefix of implicit is im, and that's within, in, or inside. So you can remember implicit as being memories that are stored from the inside, personal experiences. It doesn't take a conscious effort to memorize, whereas explicit is memorizing information outside of ourselves. And then automatic processing is part of implicit memory. And this is part of like encoding, where we have learned something and committed it to memory, not because we had to learn it for school or we're going to be tested on it, but because it was something we learned in our personal experience, like learning a language. That our caretakers or our family speak a language, and then we pick up that language, and that's the language that we know. Example that's used in the video is learning that fire is hot. So once we stick our hands in in fire or touch something hot, we understand that information is coded so well. We just implicitly remember that fire is hot, or that the stovetop is hot, and we don't have to memorize it. We know from then on. And there's a picture of the fire, so you remember. And so what I did was create a chart, and I'm hoping that with this chart you're able to take terminology when you have a class that's full of a lot of terminology, to be able to create a chart for yourself to show the breakdown of the relationship between all the terms. Because this kind of organization and association or grouping makes it much easier to remember information, because it's almost as if it's broken down or simplified in front of us. So sensory memory is kind of like like encoding, in a sense that it's very quick. Okay, nothing. Almost nothing stays. We might, for instance, if you have long hair, your hair might tickle the side of your arm while you're in class, and so you scratch your arm, and then it's over, right? And you don't that memory is gone. It happened in the moment, and it's very quickly gone. And then we talked about the short-term memory and the long-term memory. Now, to break up the long-term memory, we see explicit memory and implicit memory. And declarative memory is part of implicit memory. It's like it's knowing what for instance, like, oops, let me go back. No, you know what? I'm just going to keep it like that. Explicit memory also has within it declarative memory, and that is that's when we are trying to memorize what something is, like terminology or dates and names and concepts. And implicit memory has inside of it procedural memory. And this is the knowing how. And for instance, we know that when we touch the fire is hot. We don't have to do that anymore. Or if we learn to drive a car, this is kind of part of procedural memory. We know how to do it. We know the steps. So we don't have to try and memorize how to drive anymore. So explicit memory, if you look over here on the left-hand side of the screen, it's going to go away in a second, so make sure you grab it. Declarative memory is nope, sorry, I had the wrong thing. Okay, so I'm sorry I'm messing this up for you. So explicit memory is part of declarative memory. It's the knowing what, facts, figures, things outside of ourselves, memorizing concepts and facts and figures, whereas implicit memory is the knowing how to do something, and then knowing, we learn it once and then we just don't have to pull it up again, okay? Now moving down to episodic memories. What's the difference between episodic memories and semantic memories here? They are all part of explicit memory. I want to go back. Episodic memory is our version of events or situations. Remember, it's like autobiographical. We influence these memories. The memories get encoded and stored as our versions. They may be reality to us, but they are definitely through our perspective. Semantic memories is the kind of memorizing facts and meanings and concepts, okay? So declarative is just another way to say that it's explicit memory. It's you can think of it this way. I'm declaring that this means. And if I declare what this means, it's really a knowing what happened or what something is, okay? On the other hand, implicit memory has procedural memory and automatic processing, which is we don't need to declare anything. In fact, we're not even trying to memorize anything. We just know how. Okay, I hope that made sense for you. If you need to learn more about those facts, or those terms, remember that there's a website link and a web address for you in the last lecture slides, the first part of the lecture slide. So you can take a look at that if you want to look deeper into it. So now, all of these different types of long-term memory are important because we're going to use them when we talk about habits and behaviors, okay? So for specifically, when we're talking about understanding, making something where we start maybe needing to memorize it, but we want to know it so well that it becomes procedural. It becomes this automatic way. We don't have to stop and really do much effort recall facts or information or concepts, okay? So Barbara Oakley is an instructor, an author, and also a scientist. So she works with understanding how we learn, and she has written more than almost anyone I've seen in the teaching field. It's incredible how much she's researching and writing. And she does still teach. So what she presents are the strongest ways that students can strengthen their memory and kind of harness and empower themselves to do well and be successful using what they know about their memory. So this is Barbara Oakley, and this is her book called Mind Shift. But when I saw her speak, this was the book that she was referring to throughout her presentation. So the first thing that's really important that Barbara Oakley mentioned in her presentation is that sleep is critical. And we mentioned this in the last slide, and I'm going to repeat it again and again so that you understand this is really important. She explains that the brain, that when we sleep, our brain cells shrink. And when they shrink, brain fluid can flow through in between the brain cells and clear out toxins, but also information travels along with the fluid. So that means that information is traveling to different parts of our brains much more easily than when we're awake and stressed. We want this fluid to flow to give our brains the shower it needs. Okay. Now, with exercise, Dr. Barbara Oakley says that, a student has said that this may or may not be true, that neurons are born. But Dr. Barbara Oakley did say that new neurons are born and they actually flourish with exercise, meaning when we exercise, when we sweat, we are our neurons, the brain cells that fire off information, they spark when when new information needs to be encoded. That these brain cells are flourishing, they're healthy when we exercise, and we want to keep those healthy because those are the things that those little brain cells are incredibly powerful for helping us to remember. She spoke about diffuse mode and focused mode. And diffuse mode is the stressed mode. It's the mode that we get in when we are feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and we want to give up, and our attitude is changing. We might even be tired. Okay. And I'm sorry, that's focused mode. Excuse me. That is focused mode. So when we're over focused, okay, that's when we're stressed and overwhelmed. It's kind of like, an example would be like if you have forgotten something during a test and you're just trying to force it out of your brain, and you spend a great deal, maybe even waste some time of your test taking time to just remember what that thing is. Well, guess what? The more that you focus and the more that you try to push out that information, the more you're actually constricting yourself. You're restricting that pathway for the information to flow. Whereas when we're in diffuse mode, we're much more calm. This is when we're in a meditative state, when we're resting or taking naps, when we're laughing and enjoying ourselves, when we're not so focused. Now, there's a time to focus and there's a time to rest. And so anytime that we start to feel like we're in information overload, or we're in learning overload, or analysis overload, anything like that, we want to find our diffuse mode. We want to find where we can find some peace and switch gears. Actually, one of the things that I would do in college was either take my dog for a really long walk or go for a drive. Or sometimes I'd be in the shower, and something about being relaxed in the hot water and sort of in an in-between place where I wasn't going anywhere, but I also wasn't sitting still. This was a place where a lot of this stuff would come out because I was relaxed. So consider that as well as a habit to help your juices flow, your memory to flow. And then she also recommends that students study in different and new environments. So we all know like where we study best. Some students say they need a really quiet environment. Well, in order to stretch themselves a little bit and to learn how to be more flexible as a student, what they can do is take a baby step. Maybe rather than going straight to a Starbucks where it's really crazy and loud, maybe what they do is the first step is to study in the library where people are talking, but maybe there's not that many people, or they go somewhere that's calm but has some background noise. And then maybe they study in a place that has a little bit more noise. And that's just speaking about noise, but we can also look at like being outdoors versus indoors, or studying with people at their houses versus being at our own houses. So learning how to take baby steps into new environments. She says if we can self-test ourselves in new and different environments and still do well, still retain the information and understand what we're studying, then we're going to definitely remember during a test, even if we're stressed out. So as far as practices and tools go, Barbara Oakley says that habitual studying, meaning we are just studying a little bit every day. And even if we have to return to material that we've studied several times, we still study it over and over. And a good example of this is when I studied Latin, and I studied 3 semesters of Latin. And so I had a lot of note cards because I had a lot of vocabulary I had to memorize. And actually, my note cards, if I put them on the ground, went up to about my hip. It was that tall, the tower of note cards. So what I did was I cut them, I put them into smaller chunks, and I put them on metal rings. And I would always have one of those packs, a note card ring, with me in my purse. And if I were ever sitting down, I would just be going through them and quizzing myself. And I had a daily ritual where I would come home from school and I'd start at the top of the deck and I would quiz myself on a vocabulary word and I'd put that down and I'd pick up another one. And then the next day I'd pick up where I left off. And I did that every single day. It was a ritual for about a year and a half. So maybe even a little bit more. So I think that this habitual studying, it's going to look different for each person, but the idea is to get into the habit of having a study time and a study space and a regular practice of reviewing. Dr. Barbara Oakley also mentioned that there are slow speakers and there are speed thinkers. And she explained that, our slow speakers tend to feel self-conscious about how long it takes them to reflect on a question or how long it takes them to understand or learn a concept. Whereas they look around and they may think, or it might be their perception, that there are speed thinkers, people that are raising their hand right away, that remember things just right off the bat. And I can remember a time that this was true for me when I studied Italian. I had two best friends who were sisters, and we all took Italian together our first semester in community college, and they could remember everything. We'd go to class, and then we wouldn't be in class for 2 more days, and we'd show up to class. I would have studied and read everything and still not remembered as much, and they hadn't studied at all, but they could remember everything from the class before. And so what Barbara Oakley says is that speed thinkers don't often always check their work because they are used to arriving at an answer very quickly. Even though they are very quick learners and have strong memories, it doesn't always mean that they know how to slow down. Whereas slow thinkers, because they take their time in learning and reflecting, they are noticing things that a speed thinker might not notice, important details, and they also there's creativity at work in the brain. The person with slow thinking has more time to solve. Because they take their time, they're looking at different ways of solving a problem versus just the one answer they get right away. So if it takes you a while to understand concepts and you need to go home and practice and digest it and apply it and all of that, please don't feel odd. This is the way the brain works for some of us. She says that self-testing is key to success and to remembering and learning. I mean, really learning, not just remembering, but learning. Self-testing is key. That means quizzing yourself, checking in and making sure that you understand what you've read or what you've listened to during the lecture, writing summaries. And she says chunking is important. Now, chunking is important for that procedural memory idea that we talked about. Going through the vocabulary note cards for Latin, I chunked all of those words. That's kind of, the idea there. And as I'm going through them, I'm trying to get to a point where I know them so well that I don't have to even look at the cards to know the answer or to know the vocabulary, that I just know the vocabulary very well. And I don't have to think about it. So she says chunking works just like that. We break something up into small steps or smaller pieces, and we go over it and over it and over it in small pieces until we can slowly put those pieces back together to understand the whole enchilada or everything that we have. We can put these concepts together to understand the big picture. Okay. She gives an example of learning to drive, that when we first learn to drive, we need to look into our mirrors, and then we need to check, put on our seatbelt, and we look at several things. I don't even remember what those steps are. But when we first learn to drive, we sure do. We look in all the mirrors and everything. So, but then as we get, as we learn to drive and it becomes more natural, we don't stop and do, checking all of the mirrors. It's more of a fluid motion, because we can actually have a conversation and still drive in a fluid motion without even having to remember anything. So that's when we get to that point in a class, it means we really understand and really have learned. So chunking creates some kind of pattern that acts as a foundation, or like it links all of that we're learning together into a larger picture. And Barbara Oakley says that self-testing and chunking are the two best ways, the strongest ways to remember and to do well on tests, or to remember for tests. If you would like to learn more about Barbara Oakley and what she has to say about learning and the brain, you can visit her website. There's plenty of free downloads there. And also you can take a look at what she's accomplished. Okay, so all I'm going to go over here is to say, some of you would love to have a study guide for the next test. And I don't provide those for you because I know that you have the ability to do it on your own. You just need to know different kinds of techniques to create those study guides. So one technique is to go through the textbook and find these terms or these important ideas from chapter 3 and put the page number next to them and write, the main idea of what the book says about each of these ideas. And then go back through the lecture and link these ideas with the lecture, and find which ones are there's crossover and which ones don't have crossover. And then those are the things that you're going to study for the test, okay? And then you can figure out how to put them on a study guide, or what you need to know about the relationship between what the textbook says and what the lecture says. Now, lastly, the textbook also talks about mnemonics, and you want to know what mnemonics is, so be sure to read that in your textbook. But one key thing to remember about mnemonics is that it isn't part of deep processing. Deep processing is really understanding semantically. It's understanding the concept, the foundations of a concept, not just knowing its name, okay? So we can remember the name of a concept and not know what that concept is. Children can memorize the name of a color and not be able to point out the color because they just don't understand. So what mnemonics can do is help us to remember the name of something, or we can link, an important date write a song about it. I once had to memorize or sing a song with all the presidents' names in order when I was in 5th or 6th grade. So I memorized all of the presidents. Did I remember them all? Do I remember them now? No, I don't remember them in order the way I did when I was younger. And one of the reasons is because once I didn't repeat that song enough times for enough years, that information is no longer accessible to me, even though it's probably somewhere in my brain. If I heard the song again, I don't think I'd be able to sing along, but I'd remember that I learned that song. However, if I understand like if I learned about the Civil War very in depth, and so we were talking about Abraham Lincoln or the presidents before and after him, I may remember those presidents and their order of presidency much better because I understand what it's linked to and the importance of the timing of their presidency. So remember that mnemonics are not necessarily the best tool for every kind of remembering, but if in a jam or needing to self-test, mnemonics is a great way to do that. As you can see, Cornell notes and note cards are a form of mnemonics. So I encourage you to read that in the textbook and to maybe create a mnemonics of your own for something that you're remembering, just so that it can sink in that you know what it is. All right, so now's the time to watch the activity video that is posted for you in Canvas. It's not part of this lecture series. It actually came from a while back. Oh gosh, maybe 2 years ago. It was recorded, but the activity itself is something I still do in class. So if you would like deeper learning, I recommend that you watch it, which means please, it's mandatory to watch it. All right. Have a great week or weekend whenever you're watching this, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See you soon. Bye-bye.